Blog Talk Radio.
Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, Eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Two Guys and a Bible right here on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. I am William Bell, and with me is Dr. Don Preston. We are delighted to be with you, and I'm delighted to be back in the States. Been out for a while. I talked to Daniel Rogers, and he said he stood in for me, and I know he did a great job, and we appreciate him as well. But it's good to be here. So how are you, Don? What's going on? I know we got some exciting things coming up in the very near future.
Well, that's exactly right, and it is good to have you back, William. We did miss you, but Daniel did, in fact, do a great job, very, very good job of filling in for you. He handled all the technology seamlessly and without effort, so we're very, very thankful for that because, as you well know, I'm not very good at technology stuff. And so, again, we really appreciate the great job that he did, but it is great to have you back, as always, and we want to hear from you tonight. We want you to give us a good report on your trip to South America. I know that had to be very thrilling for you, and, of course, Leora, your wife, got to go, so that made the trip even better. And, the more that I thought about that, the more thrilling it was. You went to South America, and in some ways, you were blazing the trail for the movement of covenant eschatology in South America. And that's a very, very exciting reality. So we want to hear how your trip went.
All right. Well, thanks very much. Well, it was a beautiful trip, a really great experience. It's Central America, by the way.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, to Nicaragua. And we stayed there for 13 days and didn't really seem that long because we had quite a few things to do. We had an excellent host who made sure that we were occupied, most of the time. It was just pleasant to be around, people in that cultural setting. They were very nice, very pleasant, and very humble, very interested in seeing us. As a matter of fact, Don, there was one lady who wanted to see me, and I guess she had just heard of me through the gentleman who had invited us, Fred Gauthier. It's hard to pronounce his name sometimes, but at any rate, he told me that she had been waiting to see me, but she died a week before we got there. And we visited the family. Yeah, it was really sad. We visited the family and a couple of times, and they had, just beautiful little her granddaughter, and her husband was a shoe cobbler, a shoemaker, and we got him to make us some shoes. So Leora and I had 3 pair of shoes each made. I had house shoes made, and she had some sandals made, and that was an interesting experience, and they really looked great. As a matter of fact, I'm wearing a pair right now, and they're so comfortable. But as far as the teaching was concerned, we had a great time with Fred. who was the preacher there of a Pentecostal church. But he's very open to covenant eschatology. He's been studying it for some time. He's well aware of you and wants to meet you as well. And, is hoping that you and I will get a chance to come back and spend some time with him. He has studied, he said, he had come across this. He had been praying and fasting to help him understand, Daniel 9 and Daniel 7 and all of that. And he said he came across, my YouTube videos and downloaded pretty much all of them, and he, watched a lot of them. So he understands a lot about covenant eschatology. Just had some basic questions on some things that, the natural questions that are going to be raised as you start to study yourself out of a view that you've previously had. So we studied, we sat on his front porch just hours, and we studied. He brought his board out, and I drew charts and everything. And, yeah, he took pictures of a couple of charts that I drew out on the board and said he was going to enhance that. But, one of the things that he wanted to do was to, like one of the lessons I taught, he said he's going to take it, he's going to translate it into Spanish and French. He's originally from Canada. He speaks French, Spanish, and English.
Wow.
He's still, kind of learning English, but he definitely wants to translate some of the works that we have in French and Spanish so that they can be available there in Canada as well as in the States. And so we're looking forward to that. We talked about, just about every subject, the millennium. We talked about Satan. We talked about the second Exodus. We discussed Daniel, sealing up vision and prophecy, miracles, you name it. I mean, if it's part of eschatology, we covered as much of it as we could. Tree of life, Adam's sin, the mystery of God, and that's, and so forth. So it was very good. And we even discussed other subjects like, baptism and some other topics that related to, the work that was going on there and some of the things that we observed as we were there. And he was open to that as well. As I already mentioned to you, they don't have a lot of literature there because of the difficulty of getting it from the States. And so he had asked about, getting some books sent there. And, both of us agreed that we would, get together and send some things. So that was good. We ate a lot of beans and rice, which was kind of the staple diet. But the place where we lived was kind of in the hills. It was very cool compared to being in Managua, which was the lower area. We were a few miles outside of there. And it was so pleasant to be outside every morning and all day long in the evening. You could just sit on the porch. The air was just as cool as it could be and very pleasant. And you talk about a land flowing with milk and honey. As a matter of fact, they told me that people have this notion that they have no food in Nicaragua. And that is certainly not true. This was a land literally flowing with milk and honey. They had fruit falling all over the ground that they had to just kind of sweep up, on a regular basis several times during the time that we were there, because it's just falling off the trees. I mean, they had orange trees and avocados and mango and coconut. We even had a guy climb the coconut tree for us, got the coconut, cut it. I mean, everybody's walking around with machetes about 2 feet long, even kids. And, the people there are not very tall for the most part. So, you're talking about these 4 and 5 feet guys, and they got machetes half as tall as they are. Even kids, some of them walking around with machetes. So you'd hate to walk, in the dark and experience that. But and so he cut the coconut, and we drink from it. It was just delicious. Just great experiences there. We tasted some fruit that we had never eaten before. Leora ate some that was forbidden that they suggested she not eat. I guess because it was so rich and it detoxifies the body so much.
Wow.
And so she got a little bit sick from that. I just, decided I wasn't going to taste it based on what they said about it. But we got home and looked up the
fruit, and it has a lot of healing properties, health properties to it. So it's probably just how you have to prepare it and what state your body has to be in to consume it. But anyway, that was one thing. And then, you go to the market, everybody has food everywhere. They got all kind of fruit. I ate plenty of watermelon, fresh fruit. They made fresh juices for us every day, just about, from natural juices. And, I was just eating that up. I was just like in
that's
heaven.
right down William Bell's alley.
Absolutely. Let's see what else. Oh, we visited, families, had prayer with a lot of families, as part of, his work in terms of working with the church there. I preached 3 times, 2 eschatological lessons and then 1 just basic gospel lesson. But it was well received, and it was difficult trying to teach with a translator. His wife was actually the translator. Both he and his wife translated, because she speaks Spanish, of course, better than he does. And it was kind of tough because, you couldn't get wound up to do anything. And so, you can only say so many words at a time. And then you have to stop and let them translate. And then you go back again. And then, how it is, you get to a verse and you want to really get into it. And then you have to stop. I have to pull back and say, I can't go there. And so people were laughing. But they had a good time one night when I did 11. I had 11 points in the lesson. They were very short for the most part. But I was able to say every number from 1 to 11 in Spanish, and boy, did they get a kick out of that.
There you go.
Yeah. So, and we did our best to learn Spanish, because I took a book with me and we were learning as we go. And, I learned how to read a few signs and things as I went. And then people there were helping us to speak Spanish. And they were very impressed that we were, studying it and really making an effort at learning. We went to we had an outing. It was really, they went to baptize some people, and they had about 33 people that got baptized that day. But while we were there, we had a feast as well. And so this guy who, had a farm, he was sitting there with just food, and he'd sit there, and then every now and then he'd start peeling oranges for people and passing them around, and other fruit that I can't even remember the name of, but, it was good. And so, that's the way it was. And they're so giving in terms of the way they are. You go to a person's house, they're going to feed you. Okay. That's just the way it is. They are free with their food. They feed you when you walk in the door, or they invite you in to eat. And everybody was inviting us to eat. And we'd leave one place, and if you stopped somewhere else, you were going to get some food. And of course you dare not turn it down, because that would, offend them. But some of them were very, very poor. Very poor. It made you feel that living in America, you are just rich compared to the conditions that some of them live under. Now, we did visit a couple of homes where people were very well off. They had, huge places, and you could tell that these people were, of means, and they were educated, well educated, et cetera. We experienced some of that, but just driving along and looking at, the common person, you could tell. They're about, it seems like they're about 100 years behind us. They're still, you can still go down the street with oxen and horses and buggies and, people on a wooden carriage, and all of this is going on with trucks and cars and motor scooters, and bicycles. I tell you what, you got to be in shape to live there, because they got lots of hills. And I tell you, you saw men in their 60s and 70s, and probably some older than that, riding bicycles and weren't breaking a sweat. It was amazing. They had a lot of beautiful, natural, handcrafted furniture that looked like the stuff that we get out of our stores, but the quality of it was just absolutely amazing. Made out of just solid wood, just beautiful stuff. And this is just, out on the street where it's open. You could look right into the store. You walk right in there, because they didn't have showrooms with glass doors and stuff like that. This stuff is sitting outside for the most part, but, they don't get a lot of rain, and it's covered. but it was just amazing to see. I mean, some of the furniture was just absolutely beautiful. We visited and I'll try to wind this up because I know you got some things you want to say. But we visited an active volcano where when you look down in, it was broad, it was huge. This thing was so huge at the top. I mean, it looked like it was miles across. I mean, it was, but you could look down in the bottom of it, and I mean, pretty deep as well. I don't know how many feet it was deep, but it was deep. But you could see far enough down and see red molten, or however you say it, molten lava, still burning, and you could smell some of the sulfur coming up. And they said that they offered children and virgins, young virgins, as sacrifices in that volcano, on a hill where that volcano was. And they showed us the hill where they had the altar and where they offered them up as sacrifices, in years past. They still have some idolatry over there as well, and had a place, where they made their idols and stuff. We visited a prison that was about 100 years old. The last prisoner they let out in 1979 when the present ruler of the country took over. But this was a place where they tormented them, tortured them, tried to get information out of them, hung them upside down. They showed us all of that. It was about 8, and the prison went about 8 stories down or something in the ground.
Wow.
It was an eerie place. There were some places in there where they had no light, where they would keep them, and when they came out, they would go blind because they had not, seen any light. So it was just kind of an eerie experience to visit, to see all of that. But overall, just a beautiful place. I mean, just beautiful natural scenery, great weather at where we were, kind of up in the hills, and a great host. The people were very friendly. He had actually had a maid that came in, and she fixed food every day. She did all the cleaning, washing, etc. And I'm saying, wow, look at this guy. He's living like a king over here. But it was very good. I mean, they were Pentecostals. They had some issues that, or not issues, but, they had some practices that were a little bit foreign to us, being, of Church of Christ orientation. So we had to kind of maneuver through that, but we managed it and everything was fine. But I think we did a lot of good in terms of teaching. He's very encouraged, very enthused, and he definitely is looking forward to doing some teaching on covenant eschatology. His words to me when the night that we left, or the day before, he said, I've got to, go to the church, tell them that a lot of changes are going to have to be made. He said they're just going to have to get ready for it. And that's the way he phrased it. So it was a very, very good trip. And I'm grateful to everyone who, helped us to go there. Leora had a beautiful time. I mean, they just adopted her like she was, their child, and they loved her, and naturally everybody does. And because she's just a lovable person. But she was afraid to go initially. And we did have reason to be somewhat, apprehensive about it because, you're in a foreign place. And then, but he's an ex-military guy. So, he made sure that we were protected and always had us looking out. And he'd make sure that when you were carrying something like a camera or whatever, that you always, handled it properly or hid it properly when it was necessary. We traveled to Grenada and visited that place and kind of took in some of the scenery and the night scenery there as we walked along and viewed all these old Spanish buildings and architecture, and it was just awesome to see.
Boy, it sounds absolutely fantastic. How large of a congregation was there that you spoke for, William?
Well, the one that I spoke for was not very large at all. It was, I guess they have about 30 or 40 people. He's building a building, and it wasn't even complete. As a matter of fact, I mean, this will give you some idea. There was no, let's see, he has a roof on the building, and it's concrete walls. The floors are unfinished at this time, and and he just has, some plastic chairs, in there. But there's no door on the building. There were really no windows. He did cover them at night, but that was the facility that was used. I mean, once they finish, it's going to be a nice building, but they're just kind of working on it piece by piece, to get it done. Now, the other church that we visited, which is kind of one of the head churches there, they had about 400 plus people in the assembly the night that we were there. So it was pretty large. It was one of the larger churches there that that they were affiliated with. So he was in a whole other part of town. They were about a good hour away as a drive into, the heart of Managua, whereas he was in a town called Nicaragua. Which was a smaller town, and but that was the idea. And of course, he's while we met the pastor who was there, as they're called, we had to strategically approach that situation. So that's one that he's got to determine how he's going to handle sharing the information on covenant eschatology there. And we didn't want to jeopardize anything with our trip, with our situation while we were there.
So his congregation is simply affiliated with the larger congregation, and pardon me.
You're cutting out, unless.
Okay.
Okay.
So his congregation, as I understood you, his congregation is outside Managua, and the larger congregation is part of a larger network of congregations. Is that correct?
Well, this lady who was the minister of that church, she is the head of these other satellite churches. I don't know how many there were in the organization, and I didn't ask him. I guess I could ask him later. But he said she was over, most of the churches in that particular area. And like I said, they had a pretty large congregation. I know some of the people came from his church, and it was a load of them who came because, they rode in a truck. And man, you have to just admire the humility of them. These people would, load up in the back of a truck with no plush seats in it, just a steel bench, basically, that some of them were riding on. Some of them took a few chairs and sat in them. And then, bumpy streets, a lot of curves, a lot of bumps and stops and lumps, and they toughed it out and never complained. And that's one of the things that you didn't hear. You didn't hear any complaints, for the most part. It's like they accepted their lot and the way that they live, just like we accept what we do. And it's just natural and everyday to them.
Well, the thing that sticks out to me is the attitude of the people that you describe as a people that are happy, a people that are basically content with the situation that they are in, and that they're just generous people, they're loving people, they are accepting people, and that really is quite, let's face it, that's quite at odds with the normal American anymore. You do not find that same openness. You do not find that same generosity. You do not find the same humility. You just don't find the same hospitality in America. Now, certainly in America, I think we had that at one time. But the more that our society has grown, our cities have grown, and we've become more and more urban, and the irony of it is, as we have grown closer geographically, we have grown farther away societally and relationally in America. There's so much conflict, and that's a great tragedy. It's our loss.
Yeah, it really is. You could just feel the love these people had, the sense of brotherhood and family among them. And even when we went, we got invited to a couple of birthday parties, and and the people. I mean, it was just so much fun, and they had guys and ladies singing solos. I mean, very professional singers. We went out to a restaurant and, of course, got serenaded by the Mexican quartet, etc. Trumpet blowing, accordion playing, and guitars and singing and everything. And it was really great. It's like, it's almost like it's kind of surreal. Like, you see this on television, and now you go up in the restaurant. And I know they do that here too, but it was just, to see it all in this natural setting is really what was just so amazing about all of that. And they, another thing I was amazed at was they did not waste any food. If you were eating something and you didn't want everything on your plate, they would pass it to someone else and they would eat it and wouldn't have any problem with it, whereas we would throw it out,
Oh, certainly.
Yeah. So they just, that's the way they were. And, like I said, it was amazing, but they had, I want to get this over to, because they joked about it too, but they said there was a saying going around that Nicaraguans don't have any food to eat. And I guess maybe other people who are competing with them or something don't want you to go there and spend any time there. But I mean, it was food everywhere. You could not, I'm telling you, Don, you could not starve in that place. Even, especially in the house that we were, because I mean, they say they don't even can the fruit because they have so much of it. I mean, it's like I said, it was all floating around and everywhere.
Wow.
So just on natural stuff, I mean, you would survive with that. But they did have limits to electricity a couple of times in the area where we were. There were a couple of nights. One night that we were pretty much out of electricity for the whole time. They did not have, internet access at the house where we were. We had to go to the church building where he did have, internet connections there. But we only did that occasionally because most of the time we went there, it was for worship. Now, they went to worship about 4 times a week. And the night we went to the big church, I mean, it was like, I think we got there around 8 or 9 and left there about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. But they also fed us again. They fed us again even after that event. So, there you go. I mean, you can't do anything there without it. But and let me describe the last day that we were there. The last day we went to the beach, and all we did was just kind of relax. They said, this is the day you just enjoy yourself. So they stopped, went to the market. They bought fresh red snapper and other, fresh fruit and melons and you name it, just some of everything. And this lady had her cook with her who cooks all of the food. I mean, and she goes in, I mean, they cleaned all the fish, they cooked everything, and then they just start bringing it out to you, fresh pineapple, just everything. And so you eat, and then about 2 hours later, they're coming back with something, else. But we just, sat in and reclined in the hammock. I guess that's what you call them, right? The swinging deals.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they, swam in the pool. I didn't get in the pool. I just got to where I don't swim as much now as I used to. But they, some of them swam in the pool, but we sat around and just listened to the radio. And the guy who owned the hotel was actually from Canada, and he has a running joke. Every day you see him, it's his birthday. He said, "Today is my birthday and tomorrow." But it was kind of funny. But he was a pretty nice guy, and he gave an open invitation. He said, "If you're ever back here, I want you to come and stay at the hotel." And it was just right on the beach, pretty much, where you could walk out of his back gate and walk down to the ocean. Not very far at all, but it was really nice. So we had a good day of relaxing on the last day that we were there.
Well, that's fantastic. I was amused when you were talking a moment ago about having to get used to a translator, because some years ago, of course, I was privileged to travel to France, and pardon me, we had an audience of probably 55 to 65, perhaps as high as 70. I don't remember the exact count, but the little meeting room was almost completely packed. But there were probably, out of the audience, there were probably only 8, maybe 10 at most people that could understand English, and it was very limited, even at that. Well, my host had one of his sons by the name of Raphael. He did all of the translating. Well, I used PowerPoints. And so what Raphael did, he would take my PowerPoints during the day, because they all lived in a very close proximity to one another, and he would come to where we were, and he would take the PowerPoints, and he would put them on his computer and translate them into English. So that, translate them into French.
French, yeah.
Yeah, French. So that as I went through my chart, I would pull up chart number 3, and he would pull up chart number 3, and I've got it in English, and he's got it in French. But I had to, and of course, William, as you well know, I can get kind of wound up and talk kind of fast. And my goodness gracious, what a challenge it was for Preston to slow down.
Yes.
And you could only talk in 2 or 3 sentences at a time.
Yep.
And I would look over at Raphael, and he'd be standing there, because some of the theological terms that we take for granted in our discussions of covenant eschatology, they do not have a direct equivalent in French. And so even though he and I would practice during the day, I never said exactly during my presentation what I had told him I was probably going to say. And he would be standing over there going, okay. And he'd go, hey, wait, Don. And so it was a great challenge. So I couldn't help but chuckle to myself as you were talking about some of the challenges of speaking with a translator, because not all those terms are easily translated.
That's right, and because there were times when between him and his wife, they had to stop and ask each other, how do you say this or whatever. And then they told me one time they couldn't think of an equivalent word, so I had to just kind of dramatize it before the audience, and they kind of got it, what I was talking about. But, at the end, they said they understood, so they apparently communicated enough to where the audience got it, because they seemed to have appreciated it when it was done. And so I was grateful for that. But yes, it was a struggle. You felt like you had worked hard by the time you got down. And I tried to be as simple as I could, because I knew that, it was a communication issue there. So, and then just trying to get used to talking in very short spurts, as you say, and saying things. And then sometimes she would quote the whole verse, and I'm still trying to be a little bit deliberate to emphasize certain things. Well, she's already finished the verse. Okay. So it was touch and go along that line, but that's the way it was. But like I said, overall it was just a great experience. Even the flights were nice going in. We flew into Miami, and then from Miami straight to Managua. But and so we had 4 legs of a flight, for coming out of Memphis, one from Memphis to Miami, and then Miami there, and then the same thing coming back. And the flight coming back, we had a little bit of weather, but nothing that was really bad. But for the most part, just smooth and beautiful to experience that, and just really good. And we're grateful that, of course, we're home. And I tell you, when I had eaten so much, I lost, I guess, about 8 pounds. I don't remember exactly how much I weighed before I went, but I knew that I was losing weight, and I told Leora, about the 5th or 6th day I was there, I said, I think I'm losing weight. And I knew by the time that we were about to go that I had lost some weight. And but that's because we ate basically no bread. They don't eat a lot of bread. They eat a lot of beans, rice, and chicken and fruit and vegetables. Fresh vegetables. And when they learned that I really like natural fruit and vegetables, they added more of that. But we didn't eat a lot of meat, but they had meat and fish. Loved fish, etc. But no bread, no sweets, no sugary stuff for the most part. So you didn't get any of that. But by the time I was ready to come home, I was craving it so bad. We just wanted a piece of candy. We just wanted a piece of candy. And I don't think I got a Pepsi until the last day I was there when we were at the beach. They brought these two kind of tall bottles. And, man, they were cold. It was good. That was the best Pepsi I had in a long time. But when coming back through the airport, I think I just pigged out because I just needed to taste something, and I think I gained a pound between the airport and leaving there and coming home, gained a couple of pounds.
Well, as you know, when you and I went to Australia, even in Australia, which is very, shall we say, Americanized to a great extent. And yet their food is not American food. It's totally different. And certainly that's true over in France when we went there. And I know that every single time that we have gone to Australia and when we've been privileged to go to France, the struggle has been to acclimate to the food.
Yeah.
And even in Australia, they or France, either one, they never give you ice in your water. And Jan and I thought about that was some of the strangest thing we had never ever seen in our life. Why don't you have ice in your sodas, which, first of all, you didn't get a lot of soda over there.
Right.
But it's just like, why don't you have ice? And if you ask for ice, they look at you like, why would you want that? It's just abundantly strange. So, getting used to the customs in the different places, in the different countries, is obviously part of the challenge that is present. It can be daunting at times. At times it's funny, but other times it can be downright embarrassing because the customs and the idioms of language. I was told some years ago by a Japanese missionary who had been to Japan many, many times. And he said, if you ever go, which I never had plans to go, but be that as it may, he said, if you ever go to Japan and you're invited to someone's house, he said, if there's a footstool, don't put your feet up on the footstool. And whatever you do, do not put your feet up on a footstool with the sole of your feet facing your host. And I was like, okay, why? And he said, that is considered one of the greatest insults that you could give in Japan. You do not show the sole of your feet to your host, to anyone. It's a tremendous insult. And so learning that type of thing about the different countries that we might be able to go to is very often very, very important so that we communicate properly, so that we don't offend by the things that we might just incidentally say that we just take for granted. And yet to them, in their culture, those idioms and cliches and what have you may have a totally different, radically different, and even negative meaning for them.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and really have to think about that. I was sharing some of that with Leora when we were talking about how there are certain things that you can do when you go to these countries that could be very offensive, to them. So that you're absolutely correct about that.
Did you pick up on any cliches that we commonly use that would have been that offensive to them?
No, no. I mean, for the most part, it was pretty easy, being around them and being with them. One of the funny things that happened, as I was learning, I'm learning how to say a few things in Spanish, etc. And so it was funny. Leora and I went into to the store to buy some water and maybe some little snack or whatever. And when you exchange the money into the Cordobas, however it's pronounced, it's like a dollar is worth $29.50 of their money. So $1 US is about $29. But anyway, when you go in, first of all, you had to be able to ask for what you want. So one store we went in one time, which is right next door to the church, we couldn't speak anything. We wanted something out of there. I think it was some little, I can't remember what it was. But anyway, we couldn't tell. She couldn't speak any English, and we couldn't speak any Spanish. And so finally, we motioned and asked her, could we go around the counter and look for what we want? She said, "Yeah, come on back." So we managed to get through that, and I was able to count out the money that we needed to pay and do that. But we went to another place where it was a lady from the Dominican Republic there, and or Santo Domingo, I think it was, whatever. I guess that's I may be getting that confused, but anyway, so we went in and we had bought a handful of stuff, and she said it cost 400 and something Cordobas or whatever. I don't know how much it was, and I was trying to count it out, and she looked at me, and I looked at her, so I just pulled out a piece of money, and I said, "Is this enough?" She said, "See," and she started laughing. It was so funny. But she gave me the correct change and everything. But you just it takes a while to get used to it, because you're dealing with a whole different thing, and it seems like you're spending so much, but you're not. They may tell you this costs 70 Cordobas, and that's like $2 and something.
Wow. Yeah.
So it takes some getting used to.
Well, that's part of the challenge of traveling to another place. Now, there at the church where you spoke, how would you rate the Bible knowledge of the congregation itself?
Well, interesting question that you ask. It was hard to determine because I couldn't tell what they knew. Now, another thing, I actually bought them some Bibles, Don, because half of the congregation didn't have Bibles. And I said, this is going to be tough because I'm going to be asking people to turn to certain scriptures, and I wanted them read. I wanted the people to see them. And he had said, and we hadn't discussed this before, but he had said that other people had visited there and told them that they were going to send them Bibles. As I told you before, they have some challenges getting some things, and they're poor, So he had mentioned that to me. And so I said, well, how much are the Bibles? So we went by this store, and they gave us a good deal. It was about $4 a piece, for some Bibles. And I think I bought about 15 of them. And one of the things, I didn't take a lot of money with me because someone had already, I talked to some people who had been there before, and they were telling me how much money to take and everything. So I kind of, didn't take a lot of money because, they said people are very suspicious if they see you with a lot of money, et cetera. And so you didn't want to create any of those situations. But I actually could have taken more than I did. And I was trying to make sure, because this was kind of early in the trip, and I wanted to make sure that I had enough money to sustain me the whole time that I was there, which, wasn't a problem because we didn't have to spend, a lot for the things that we did buy. But so we went by the bookstore, and I just bought 15 Bibles and gave them to them, gave them to the members there. And a few of them had Bibles. It seemed when I was teaching, they were turning pages, and there was actually one person who had come there who was from another church. I don't know whether it was a Church of God or something, but she was from another church. And was very high in her position as well, but I think she got there was some kind of issue that I don't know whether she got kicked out or something happened that was kind of a negative scenario for her. But she was there the first night that I taught, and she was, as a matter of fact, she asked a question after I was done. Because that night I spoke on this generation. Like I said, I kept everything very, very simple. And so I spoke on this generation. And when I finished, she said, I was taught that a generation was about 80 years. And she quoted Psalms 90 as her proof text. And so I, responded with Hebrews 3 and some other points about a generation. And the congregation pretty much agreed with what I said, so they understood enough. Some of this is coming through the translator, but I was really impressed that she had paid that much attention to me, that she could, ask that question from what I had presented. Like I said, I tried to keep it as simple as possible, but they all seemed to have understood. And apparently she had some knowledge of eschatology, et cetera, from that perspective. And I know, and there were several people who were turning pages very seriously as I was going through, and I was, paying attention to that along the way. But I could not. I can just tell you the things that you would say about the Bible, they seemed to know. It was like, and this was true pretty much of most of them. They knew it was in the Bible. They'd read it before. They'd heard it before, but they probably couldn't have told you where to find it. But that's common with people here.
I started to say that's nothing new. That's not. Yes, that's very common right here in the United States. Yes.
Yeah. So they seem to be very knowledgeable, of what's in the Bible. They just, couldn't. And even Fred told me, he said, man, I am amazed how you can point out exactly where these things are. And he even mentioned you. He says, and I've heard you and Don quote these passages, et cetera. And I said, well, it's just that, we've been doing it for a long time, and that's just kind of the way we were oriented. He said, yeah. He said, well, I'm impressed with that. He said, but that kind of was something that, he mentioned himself, because he knows the Bible, he teaches the Bible, but he doesn't know how to find those things like we would just call up a verse and say, yeah, it's in this book, this verse, and this chapter, this chapter, and this verse, etc. But he's well acquainted with the scriptures and does a good job of teaching. He's very illustrative type preacher in terms of making things very clear. He will even demonstrate or dramatize them. This guy taught a lesson, Don. And it was a really good lesson. But he taught a lesson, and he spoke in English for that particular one. I think on one night he started in English and ended up in Spanish, because I guess But this lesson he taught in English, and he was teaching people how to. I think it was on love and how to treat another person, treat them the way you want to be treated. But in order to do that, you got to know the other person. He literally took off his shoes and gave them to his wife. She put on his shoes, and she had on some heels, and he put on the heels and then preached the whole sermon in those heels to tell people. It was very, very, moving lesson, really. He's a good communicator, excellent communicator. But to see that was just really amazing in the way that he presented it. And he stood there and he said, "Now, I don't want anybody taking any pictures and put them on Facebook." But it was something, and he's a kind of big guy. He's a kind of big guy. And you could see him, stepping in those little heels and then standing there and teaching for another 15 minutes at least, before he, gave them up to illustrate his points. But that's the kind of teaching he does. And I said that if he or when he prepares some messages for eschatology, I think he's going to be a great asset because of his ability to communicate on such a level where people can really understand. I mean, you have no question whatsoever with the concepts that he breaks, in the way he breaks down concepts. And if he can bring that aspect to covenant eschatology, man, he'll be really, really good, really effective in terms of his teaching style.
I have always had a tremendous appreciation for people who can give powerful illustrations. Sometimes simple illustrations, but nonetheless that so effectively get the point across through illustration. I know when I was a young man, I used to hear my father talk about a black minister by the name of Marshall Keeble. And my father always talked about how Marshall Keeble was such an illustrator that he communicated so effectively, because he would say, now, the gospel is like this, the gospel is like that. And he would give all of these illustrations that were so simple, so understandable, and they were directly out of people's lives. It was almost like Jesus' parabolic teaching when Jesus was telling the parable of the field, the different soils, the sower going forth to sow. When he talked about whatever it was, but he told his parables, and those parables were directly out of the life, the everyday life of his audience. And again, my father said that's what Marshall Keeble did. And I've always appreciated your ability to illustrate lessons as well. And you do a great job of making diagrams that illustrate your point. And I have always had a difficulty personally of coming up with just the right illustration, the just the right parable, if you please, in order to help people to see the point that I'm trying to make. My approach, as you well know, is more dialogic. It's more direct. It's more syllogistic and what have you, and it's not illustrative. But to me, someone with that ability to give simple, succinct, easy to understand illustrations from everyday life that drive home very powerful and very important theological points is a fantastic ability.
Oh yeah. I mean, like I said, I was very impressed with his ability to do that. I've heard, I heard him teach Revelation 21 in the streets of gold, and like no one I've ever seen do it before in the way he dramatized it. I mean, he literally had, made you feel that they were walking down the street, reached down and got a handful of the living water and drank it. I mean, it was something to see. I mean, it was, it was just really his imagination. And he said he thinks like a child. He says he's a child at heart, and that comes across. That he's a fun guy. That comes across in his ability to in his method of teaching, and so you can appreciate that. But going back to Marshall Keeble, I mean, this guy was just amazing, and I've heard the stories about him. Like we had one of the elders when I was back in my 20s. This elder, he was about 70 years old, but he remembered Marshall Keeble's preaching, and he would tell and I read a little bit of his book and listened to a couple of his tapes that were so faint on these old cassette tapes you could barely hear.
Yes.
But at any rate, I remember them telling that he had people who were just so antagonistic to him, people in denominational churches, etc., that just wanted to just take him and choke him, and they would hide in the bushes, they said, and sneak out to hear him, and before he finished preaching, they'd be walking out to get baptized. I mean, that's how effective he was, and they said he just, with that simplicity and his natural ability to communicate, he was able to turn people just all over this country around for Christ. And It's great. Something like that should have been bottled and canned, and sold to all the rest of us preachers.
No joke. Well, I've heard it said that he probably converted more people to Christ during his lifetime than most other preachers combined in the churches of Christ. That he led literally thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people to Christ, and so he was to be admired. But it gets back to that simplicity and his power to illustrate the gospel of Christ in such a way that the message was essentially undeniable to people.
Mm-hmm.
Very powerful. And it makes you wish, like you said, it makes you wish they could have bottled that and sold it to the rest of us.
Absolutely.
I actually heard one recording when I was a young man. Someone had a recording of one of his lessons, and it's like you said, it was so faint that you could barely make out that someone was talking. It sounded like they were 3 miles away.
Yep.
But nonetheless, my phone is sitting here next to my computer, and 110% of the phone calls that I get on this phone are nothing but solicitations. So anyway, sorry about that.
No problem.
Well, I tell you, it sounds like you had an absolutely fantastic trip, one that was certainly enjoyable insofar as time spent, and most of all, obviously, it sounds to me like your trip was profitable in laying the groundwork. Your host there, it sounds to me like he is going to be a very, very effective communicator for the message of covenant eschatology, and it remains to be seen, obviously, what becomes of your efforts there. But based upon the comments that you shared with me offline yesterday, I guess it was, and then what you shared with us tonight, it seems more than evident that he has a heart that is completely open to whatever the Bible says. And if that's what the Bible says, then that's what he's going to communicate to his church, come what may. And that's the type of people that we need on the firing line in order to make the movement of covenant eschatology grow more and more.
Yes, it was, as I was there, you got the sense that, you're almost back in Bible times, the way people lived and the way things were. It was just, I couldn't help but think of, just this had to be the way life was back then, the way people lived, the way they interacted with each other and communicated, the closeness of the families, et cetera. And man, just the natural scenery of everything going on. It was amazing to be there and to see all of that. But yes, you're absolutely correct. I think he's going to really just grow and be very strong in his presentations of covenant eschatology. And like we said, if we can get some books and materials to him, he's going to work on translating some of that as well as writing some things himself. He says he's already planning to write a book on covenant eschatology, and some tracts and things that he can distribute, and that if we have some small pieces, he will translate them into French and Spanish so that they can be distributed there as well.
Well, that's absolutely great. Well, we're almost out of time here this evening, but as you suggested at the very first program, we've got some very exciting things going on. I want to remind everyone that next Monday, April the 10th, I will be having a formal 2-hour YouTube debate with Dr. Jaime Pickett, who is a progressive dispensationalist. William will be getting the technology all set up. It will be live streamed on YouTube. We hope to have it also live streamed on Facebook, and it will, of course, I don't know if it'll be live on Fulfilled Radio or not. That will be up to William. And Daniel said he'd be glad to help work out the technology on that. But I'm very, very, very much looking forward to that debate with Dr. Jaime Pickett. Don't forget, folks, June 15th and 16th In Montgomery, Alabama, I'll be having a second formal public debate with Dr. David Hester of Faulkner University. And then in July 13th through the 15th, we have our Predators Pilgrim Weekend here in Ardmore, Oklahoma. That's just 3 of the events that are coming up on my personal docket. So I want you to be looking for that, be a part of that, and be sure to tune in next Monday night, April the 10th, for that debate. I think it's going to be very, very enjoyable. And William, thank you for the report. It's very, very exciting what you shared with us as you've gone down there to to be a pioneer in taking covenant eschatology to Central America. We appreciate your efforts so very, very much. We know you did a great job. And folks, thank you for joining us this evening on Two Guys in a Bible here on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. And with that, we will say good night and God bless.
Thank you for joining the Two Guys in a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Dunn Preston and myself, we'd like to say have a very pleasant day and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.